Дякую. Шановні пани та панове, я не розмовляю українською мовою. I'm sorry, I wish I could do it in Ukrainian, but I can't. So with your permission, I'll do it англійською мовою, okay? Добре. And by the way, the reason I don't speak Ukrainian is a direct result of the Soviet policy of Russification in the Crimea. So there's no questions about it. I went to the English school, and they said, oh, you're studying English, you don't need Ukrainian. Duh, that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years, think back. 1967, Petro Shelest was ousted as a first secretary for nationalism. Russification that I just mentioned is in full swing, not just in the Crimea, but everywhere in Ukraine. Political prisoners from the generation of the fighters of World War II and nationalists who came after them are in the Gulag. And here we are today. Thank God. No, I'm serious. Thank God. People prayed for Ukraine and other countries of the Soviet Union to be free, and people worked for that, and people gave their lives for that, and here we are. So now let's talk about the next 50 years. We're here thanks to you and thanks to people in Ukraine, like the member of the Rada here, and our predecessors, our parents' generation. But let's talk about our kids and our kids' generation and their kids eventually. My kids are already in their 20s. I'm moving to the point I don't have to support them.
Don't believe it.
So the first issue I want to address is what was happening in Ukraine for the last 10 or 12 years. And from this graph, let's see if from this graph, you could see that after the Orange Revolution, the investment went up, and then it started to go down. It went up a little bit because people still didn't understand what Mr. Yanukovych is and who he is and what his semya was. And then it started going down, 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 down before the Russian invasion. So things were not great. Concerns from the American perspective with Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the grab of assets inside the Ukrainian economy by the Yanukovych family and his close associates and oligarchs, all that gives you this dynamic, and this ends with the Euromaidan. And Maidan actually provided Ukraine a lot of positive coverage, provided Ukrainian society a lot of positive coverage, and the challenge is when a country moves from a more corrupt and repressive regime to somewhat less corrupt and much less repressive regime, how do you translate into investment? So the ongoing crisis caused by Russia, the occupation of the Crimea, the warfare in Donbass are the most common noticed political risk for outside investors, and the corruption and poor regulation environment remains the internal challenge for investment. I do advisory work in the oil and gas sector, and boy, oh boy, these small independent American companies that went there and spent tremendous resources, many, many thousands of hours of work, tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, they are squeezed by the monopoly of Naftogaz, by the oligarchs, and by very, very high tax rates on the production. They are, and actually this is a good place to talk about oil and gas, because when you turn on the Canadian Business News Channel, it's all about mining and oil and gas. I feel so good here. Maybe I should move here. Anyway, so where are the areas that you can still invest and hope to make some money? And my joke to a small panel that I was part of yesterday was the old Israeli joke: how do you make a little bit of money in Israel? You bring a lot of money and you're left with small money. And then a colleague said, oh, in Ukraine we lost everything. Not funny. Aerospace. Aerospace. Look at this beautiful Antonov 223 Mriya. It can carry a space shuttle. It is a unique plane. Antonov 124 Ruslan is a unique, wonderful platform. I have friends who, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, created a little company and did air transportation all over the world. And of course, other people came then and took the company away from them. But they made good money initially. That plane did not develop further. Antonov 138, if I remember correctly, 138, the mid-range plane, was not developed and marketed around the world. It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy we don't have Antonovs flying in Canada or you have you have Bombardier, but right. Well, let's not go there. Okay. But before that, how do you develop modern private high-tech and IT and biotech in the 21st century? You develop it with angels, you develop it with hedge funds, you develop it with venture capital. That culture in Ukraine is not there yet. And the people who can develop it is American Ukrainians and Canadian Ukrainians and Australian Ukrainians, people who know how to do business and have probably better access to financial resources than your average Ukrainian entrepreneur. But look at the data. 17 funds only, and the investments of about 200,000 to $1 million. Very, very small. We have to move much, much faster to bigger numbers. I mentioned the airspace just quickly. In addition to what I mentioned, the Antonov and the space launches, the Yuzhmash, the space industry was pretty stagnant for decades, and now it's changing. You have booster rockets that go up. Not the space shuttle. The booster rockets goes up and goes down with a parachute by itself and lands. Tesla, Elon Musk, and Bezos are doing that already. Can Yuzhmash or other Ukrainian companies compete in that space? I don't know, but they should. If they won't, the Americans will kill the Russian competition, which is good, and the Ukrainian competition, which is bad. Another thing, mini satellites. What used to be a 1-ton satellite today does more work and is weighing 100 kilos, 1/10 of what it used to be, and gets smaller and smaller. Miniaturization. Can Ukraine compete in that? We are moving, believe it or not, it sounds like science fiction, to self-driving, flying aerial vehicles. Somebody mentioned the drones. Yeah, you'll dial for pizza, literally, and the drone will come and deliver you what Amazon delivers, which is everything these days. Good Lord, I have all these boxes at home from Amazon. I don't know what to do with the boxes. Now, then the next stage, we will have these drones, self-piloting drones, evacuating the wounded from the battlefield or being used as flying ambulances. And then, ladies and gentlemen, how cool it depends how you look at it, how cool it is or how scary, it'll be a flying taxi without a pilot. Yeah, you get into the flying taxi and you fly to the airport or wherever you're going, and that's it. Can Ukraine compete in that? It has a strong aerospace and a very strong IT sector. If you marry the two, you're getting a flying taxi because it's probably 60% software, 40% hardware. Agriculture, the breadbasket of Europe, you know all that better than I do, Chernozem and all that. The question is why the Russians have private property on land and Ukraine does not. It is silly. It is tragic. The best development of agriculture across the world, there's no debate about that. Every World Bank study, just like private industry is more competitive and more efficient than state-owned, privately held land in agriculture with a system of banking, of agro-banking, that you can use it as a collateral for a loan. You can take a loan and develop rural industry, and also very, very important, every state, every country that has successful agriculture has a massive educational system in the village. So it's not just in Kyiv or in Lviv an agricultural faculty for 5-year degree, for a master's degree. It is a peasant that goes, a farmer, not a peasant, a farmer that goes and learns the most cutting-edge technology in livestock, in milk processing, in vegetables, in grains, in whatever they are doing. He or she need to learn it on the spot without leaving the location. IT and high tech, growing fast, really a bright spot, but it's small, 3.3% of the GDP, only 100,000 people. It is a high value added per worker, but the question is how fast can it grow and whether these people will stay in Ukraine or migrate. The Russian IT story is that the Russian IT people are at 495 corridor in Boston, in Silicon Valley, and in wherever else we're doing IT in the United States. So they're losing it. Putin doesn't care because these are the people who will be out in the streets demonstrating. He doesn't need it. Ukraine needs people like that back home. If India can have $100 billion a year IT sector, why Ukraine cannot double, triple, quadruple its IT? The success stories. I use Grammarly. Who used Grammarly to prevent plagiarism? You're not preventing plagiarism. Other companies, Samsung, Boeing, Siemens, etc., set shop there, but still the main story of Ukraine is outsourcing. Ukrainians are the IT sweatshops for the big guys. The challenge, just as Israel went through that, is how do you create a world product? How do you build companies that go for IPOs? I don't think there were any NASDAQ Ukrainian IPO companies. People in this room and elsewhere in the community need to work with the Ukrainian IT entrepreneurs to get to the point where a Ukrainian company can be at NASDAQ going for an IPO, when a Ukrainian product, in addition to Grammarly, becomes a world brand. Building global brands is where the value added is. Okay, now the president told us yesterday not to criticize too much. With your permission, I'll say something. As a lapsed lawyer, looking at this legal environment, I worked for the World Bank in legal reform in Georgia, in Russia, worked for Saakashvili directly. Look, this is the software. You can have the Antonov factory, you can have Dniprohes, you can have all these big boxes and buildings. If the software is not there, this business will not attract investment. It will not function properly. So instead of centralizing power in the executive branch, instead of having беспредел. How you say беспредел in Ukrainian? Беспредел.
Бесчинство.
Бесчинство, okay. By the oligarchs and for the oligarchs, the rule of law is what makes or breaks a modern economy. And you have the known list: opaque and costly regulatory environment, dysfunctional and corrupt court system, and things are getting better. Things are getting better. And building a nation, this is probably the main thing that I got from looking at the data and preparing for this presentation. Building a nation is tough. There are many, many countries around the world which were established in the post-colonial era elsewhere, and they are not doing even as well as Ukraine. Look at Moldova, right next door. People stole $1.2 billion from a national bank and got it outside of the country, and the GDP of Moldova is like $6 billion. So, man, that is, grand theft auto and grand theft banking in full light, in full daylight. And on top of that, they laundered, who knows how much the Moldovans laundered. GDP $6 billion, they laundered $20 billion from what we know, and there are probably some more $1 billion that we don't know. So, in comparison with the neighbors, and of course in comparison with other places, Ukraine is not doing so bad. But at the same time, 1990, the famous statistic, Ukrainian GDP per capita and Polish GDP per capita are the same. Now the polls are 3 times more. So when I'm looking 50 years forward and maybe 20 years forward, and there was a speaker yesterday, I think the gentleman from the Rada, said, let's have a GDP that is, 3 times bigger. Let's have a GDP that is twice as big as Russia. Let's have GDP that is at the par with Poland in 10 or 20 years. God willing. All right? So real achievable metrics that the presidency, I said concentration of power. The bad thing is when they say, oh, this factory needs to do this, or this factory goes to my crony here. But the big metrics, the big picture, yeah, of course, that's called leadership. That's what presidents do. Let us get GDP per capita in Ukraine twice as big as the Moskali. Legal solutions in the early stages, National Agency of Prevention of Corruption, NAZK, creation of the Supreme Court. I think Supreme Court is already there, right? Okay, I'll tell my intern. Bill 6011. Ask the member of the Rada what is it doing in anti-monopoly law. And good news, Mr. President, time required to start a business is dropping. The question is what's happening with the business after that. To conclude, there are bright spots. Strengthening the ties with the European Union is a simple means to improve the Ukrainian economy with the regulations that follow from EU agreements called the acquis communautaire may not always be to the oligarchs' liking, but the huge gains from the EU market still provide an effective incentive for reform. Given Ukraine's large natural resource bounties, land reform would be a key area that could greatly boost the Ukrainian economy. Keeping the momentum from Euromaidan protests as a country that is striving for freedom will be a good message, a good narrative for investors. Diaspora can and should be at the forefront of the fight for new and friendly Ukrainian investment environment. It should lead the way as a trailblazing investor, or the trailblazing investor should come from the diaspora, in my opinion. So the concentrated push for policies that make Ukraine the magnet of investment in Eastern and Central Europe, focusing on the sectors that are least corrupt, such as high-tech and IT, and attracting high net worth individuals and financial institutions that can fund incubators. These are small investments. You fund an incubator, you take an equity stake in a startup, and you do it for 30 or 40 startups. One of them pops or two of them pop. You made money. You funded that incubator, and you did well for Ukraine. What else? I'm a great believer in sending your kids, one's kids, including my kids, to the native country for at least a year of work. Hopefully they speak the language already. If not, we have wonderful teachers of Ukrainian here who can put them through a crash course. And together with private and government organizations, create information exchange centers, because I don't know, and many of you don't know, what are the promising new startups. Startups usually, because I do advisory work with companies in the Strategic Communications Center, we try to get their messages, their investment needs, their products out there. They just don't have the money to do it. If your first round was $100,000, your second round was $500,000, your third round was $1 million, these people need to eat and support their families and bring new technology and hire new people. They don't have big budgets for strategic communication. But if you, with the government, set up an information center to promote the startups in the Silicon Valley, in New York, in Chicago, yes, maybe in Toronto, you will expend 10 times, 100 times the ability of other people to find out about it and possibly invest. My last crazy idea, because I had conversation with people who did invest in Ukraine, is the high-tech bond. So if you have Ukrainian mutual funds, they're going to kill me now. That's all Walter's fault. He said, talk about the Ukrainian mutual, what is it called, mutual savings societies. Okay. Mutual savings societies have to preserve the capital, the principal, and make an interest for their members. But if you figure out with the Ukrainian banks and with the government, maybe with government guarantees, a bond that will invest in high-tech and IT in Ukraine. Let's talk about it. I'll be very happy to participate as international market analysis, as a strategic communications guy, in something exciting like that. It will be innovative and with enough insurance or security, maybe a insurance from a Canadian government or from the US government. You can build it in such a way that high-tech and IT entrepreneurs can get 100,000, 500,000, maybe up to $1 million, and you spread it, and then whatever pops pay you back, and you're good. So, thank you very much, and I'm convinced that the next 50 years are going to be so much better than the previous 50 years, thanks to you guys. Thank you.
Dr. Cohen, thank you for your unshakable optimism.